I was 25 when I decided to start my own business. It all started with a failed career attempt, a little bit of ego bruising, and a whole lot of confusion. I grew up in a middle-class family, and like many others, I was told that going to college, getting a stable job, and building a career was the route to success. I went along with it, got my degree, and landed a decent 9-to-5 job at a mid-sized tech company in a city I had always wanted to live in. I thought it was the dream. At first, things went well. I was a part of a growing team, contributing to software projects, and slowly moving up the ranks. But as time passed, something started to feel off. The excitement faded, the tasks became routine, and I realized that I was no longer growing professionally. I wasn't learning new things, and I wasn't challenged. Worse, I found myself looking at the clock every day, waiting for the workday to end. I was stuck in the cycle of a job I didn't care about, with the kind of stability that didn't bring me fulfillment. At the same time, I was watching a lot of people around me quitting their jobs to pursue things they were passionate about: friends, family, even people on social media. They had found success in ways that weren't traditional, and while some were still in the grind, many had built something of their own. I was inspired, but also paralyzed by fear. I kept thinking, what if it fails? What if I lose everything? It wasn't until one of my closest friends quit his job to start his own e-commerce business that things clicked for me. He had been talking about it for months, and while I'd been skeptical at first, his progress made me rethink everything. He wasn't just talking about his dreams anymore. He was making them happen. By the time I visited his place, his garage was filled with inventory, and he was working 12-hour days handling customer inquiries, processing orders, and managing the website. It was intense, but he was making a steady income and was genuinely happy doing it. That was the moment when the switch flipped for me. I realized that it wasn't about having a perfect job or the safest path. It was about creating a life I actually wanted to live. So, I decided to take the plunge and start my own business. I had no business experience, no formal training, and no solid idea of what I was doing. I had the advantage of being a tech person, so I understood the basics of web development, SEO, and digital marketing. But that was pretty much it. I also didn't have a lot of startup capital. I had saved a bit of money from my job, but it was far from enough to fund a business properly. I had to get creative. I knew that the e-commerce model was something I could try, so I started researching product ideas. Initially, I wanted to sell something in the tech space, but I quickly realized that the competition was fierce, and I'd be fighting an uphill battle without a unique angle. After some brainstorming, I pivoted. I thought about what people really needed and what I could do better than the competition. After a lot of trial and error, I decided to focus on eco-friendly home products. It was a niche market with growing demand, but not overly saturated yet. The first step was building a website. I spent days and nights on it, using my tech skills to build an e-commerce site from scratch. I had a few friends and family members help with feedback, but I was doing most of the work myself. I set up product listings, researched suppliers, and figured out how to handle shipping and returns. I didn't have a clear strategy at first. I was just learning as I went. One thing I did have was a passion for sustainability. I spent hours researching eco-friendly alternatives to everyday products, like reusable kitchen wraps, bamboo toothbrushes, and biodegradable cleaning supplies. I built my brand around the idea that small changes could make a big difference in reducing waste. I also decided that my business would focus on quality over quantity. I wasn't going to sell cheap knockoffs. I wanted products that people would actually use and feel good about buying. Once I had my website up and running, I turned my attention to marketing. I knew that social media would be key for driving traffic, so I dove headfirst into Instagram and Facebook ads. At first, I had no idea what I was doing. My ads barely got any clicks, and the few people who did visit my website didn't buy anything. But I kept experimenting with different ad copy, visuals, and targeting. Slowly but surely, I started seeing some traction. By month 3, I had made my first sale. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel my motivation. I thought, if one person bought from me, then others could too. I used that first sale to reinvest in the business, improving my website and expanding my product line. I also reached out to influencers in the sustainability space, offering them free products in exchange for reviews and shoutouts. This strategy helped me build a small but loyal following. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. I had moments where I thought I was going to fail. My personal finances were tight, and I was working long hours, often late into the night. The pressure was immense, and there were several times when I considered throwing in the towel. But every time I faced a setback, I remembered my friend's success and how far he had come. He was proof that it was possible. So I kept pushing. By the 6th month, I started making enough money to pay myself a modest salary. I was no longer relying solely on my savings. I had started seeing a real return on my investment. With that stability, I reinvested further, hired part-time help, and expanded my product range. I even took out a small loan to scale my inventory. Things really took off after I hit the 1-year mark. I had consistent sales, a growing customer base, and a social media presence that was helping me reach more people. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was finally doing something I was proud of. My business had a purpose, and I felt connected to my customers in a way I never had in my previous job. Now, it's been 3 years since I launched my business. It has grown significantly, and while there are still challenges, I'm no longer overwhelmed. I have a team, a sustainable product line, and a customer base that values what I offer. I can't say it's easy or that I don't have doubts from time to time, but it's been worth every late night, every mistake, and every bit of stress. I created something that reflects my values, and I'm excited to see where it goes next. I didn't have a perfect start, but I had the determination to keep going. If I can do it, anyone can. It all started with the realization that I wasn't willing to settle for a life that didn't excite me, and I'll never look back. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So, this is a story about how I went from a broke college graduate with nothing to my name to building a 6-figure business within just 3 years. It wasn't easy, but looking back, I realize it was one of the most rewarding and wildest journeys I've ever been on. I graduated from college with a degree in business management. If you ask me what I learned, I'd say the theory of everything, because none of it really prepared me for the real world. I had 0 job prospects. The job market was rough, and companies weren't hiring fresh grads, at least not in the field I wanted to get into. I was drowning in student loans and living in a cramped apartment, eating ramen like it was my last meal. I felt stuck. One day, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I came across a post from a former classmate who was running a small online business. He was making a solid income selling simple products on Amazon. I'd never even considered e-commerce as a serious thing before, but the thought of being my own boss sparked something in me. I decided to do some research, even if I had no idea where to start. I spent the next few weeks diving into every piece of information I could find about selling on Amazon. I read countless blogs, watched YouTube videos, and joined online forums. Honestly, it was overwhelming at first, and I felt like there was so much to learn. But something about it felt right, so I kept pushing forward. I didn't have a ton of money saved up, but I had a small nest egg from some freelance work I'd done. I used that money to buy a small batch of products, phone accessories, of all things. Why phone accessories? They seemed cheap to buy in bulk, and the competition didn't seem as fierce as some other categories. Plus, they were lightweight, so shipping costs would be lower. I found a supplier on Alibaba and placed my first order. It wasn't a huge investment, just enough to test the waters. When the products arrived, I was both excited and terrified. I created an Amazon seller account, took some terrible photos of the products, thank God for Amazon's image optimization tools, and listed them. I had no marketing plan, no website, no experience with Amazon's platform, but I was ready to take a leap of faith. I'll spare you the drama of the first couple of months. It was a complete flop. I didn't sell a single unit for the first 3 weeks. I was so discouraged, but I knew I had to keep learning. I took some courses, joined mentorship programs, and began to experiment with paid ads. Slowly but surely, the sales started trickling in. Not a flood, but a steady stream. The real breakthrough came when I figured out how to optimize my listings. I spent hours tweaking my keywords, improving my product descriptions, and working on my pricing strategy. Little by little, my product started to climb the ranks on Amazon. The first time I got a notification saying I had made a sale while I was sleeping was a feeling I'll never forget. It was proof that it was working. By month 6, I had broken even and was finally starting to turn a profit. I reinvested that money into expanding my product line and improving my listings. I was spending every waking hour working on my business. I didn't have a social life, but I was obsessed. I knew this was my way out of debt and the daily grind. I kept learning, optimizing, and scaling. The more effort I put in, the more rewards I saw. By the end of the first year, I had reached a point where I was making enough money to quit my day job. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough to feel comfortable and start dreaming bigger. I used that time to fine-tune my business even further. By the second year, I had enough cash flow to invest in hiring a small team to help with customer service, inventory management, and marketing. That's when I realized how important it was to delegate and free up my time so I could focus on growing the business. In year 3, things really took off. I had a well-oiled operation, a team that was working with me, and a brand that was starting to get recognized. I expanded into new markets and launched more products. I also started experimenting with social media marketing, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook ads. These platforms became game changers for my business. People started finding my brand outside of Amazon, which increased sales on both my Amazon listings and my website. I'll be honest, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when I thought I was going to crash and burn. For example, there was a time when my supplier messed up an order, and I had to deal with angry customers. There was another time when a competitor started copying my listings and my sales dropped for a couple of months. But every time I faced a setback, I found a way to learn from it, adapt, and move forward. Now, I've reached a point where I'm making over 6 figures annually in profit. I've moved out of that tiny apartment, and I can finally pay off my student loans. I've been able to reinvest in the business, take trips to places I never thought I'd visit, and even treat my family to things I couldn't afford back in the day. I still work hard, but it feels different now. I'm doing something I love, and it's paying off. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson I learned was to never give up. The path to success isn't always linear, and you're going to face a ton of failures before you get to the point where things are clicking. I also learned the importance of continuous learning. The e-commerce world is always changing, and if you're not adapting, you'll get left behind. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: start. Even if you don't have all the answers, just start. Learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. It's all part of the process. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of persistence. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm excited to see where it takes me next. I've already started thinking about the next chapter, maybe branching out into other product categories or even starting a second business. But whatever happens, I know this: I'll keep grinding, because the hustle is what got me here, and the hustle will keep me moving forward. It all started in 2015, in the middle of a bustling city where everything seemed to move at breakneck speed. My name is Jason, and I was just an ordinary guy working a 9-to-5 job as a project manager in a small tech firm. To everyone around me, I had everything: stability, a steady paycheck, and a sense of security that many would envy. But deep down, I felt trapped. The corporate world, the endless meetings, and the monotonous routine were slowly draining my spirit. One day, while walking home from work, I saw a group of young people outside a coffee shop, engaged in an intense conversation about business ideas. They were discussing everything from startups to market trends, and one of them mentioned a concept that sparked something inside me: subscription-based business models. I had heard of this in passing but had never really thought much about it. But that evening, the idea stuck with me. I spent the next few weeks researching it obsessively. I watched videos, read articles, and studied successful businesses that had adopted this model. Netflix, Spotify, Dollar Shave Club, they all had something in common. They offered customers convenience, value, and a unique experience. As I looked at my own life, I realized that I wasn't getting the same excitement or satisfaction from my current job. I had the tools, the skills, and the drive to make something of my own. So why not give it a shot? The first idea I landed on was building a subscription box for men's grooming products. At the time, subscription boxes were a hot trend. Companies were offering curated boxes for everything from snacks to clothing, and I thought, why not take the same model and apply it to grooming? I dove into planning. I spent sleepless nights researching suppliers, packaging, and the logistics of subscription services. My mind was buzzing with ideas. How could I differentiate myself from the dozens of other men's grooming box companies that were already out there? What would make my brand stand out? I realized that the personal touch was key. I didn't want to just ship random products. I wanted to offer a tailored experience. So I started thinking about ways to personalize the boxes, maybe a questionnaire that would allow subscribers to tell me about their specific grooming needs and preferences. That way, I could curate the perfect box for each individual customer. But there was one huge obstacle. I didn't have a clue about how to market this idea. I had worked in project management and tech, but I had never actually built a brand from scratch. I knew I had to learn fast. I started reading everything I could on digital marketing, branding, and customer acquisition. I joined online forums, reached out to people in the industry, and tried to soak in as much knowledge as I could. After months of planning, I decided to take the plunge and start my business. But before I launched, I needed capital. I didn't want to risk my savings, and I didn't have investors lined up. So, I turned to crowdfunding. I built a campaign on Kickstarter, offering early bird subscribers exclusive boxes and a chance to be part of something new. I was nervous as hell. Would anyone care? Would anyone believe in my idea? To my surprise, the campaign took off. Within the first 2 weeks, I had raised 60% of my funding goal. That was the moment I realized I might actually be onto something. The excitement and the support I received from people I'd never met gave me the boost I needed to keep going. But the real challenge had just begun. I spent the next several months scrambling to build the business, fulfill orders, and maintain customer satisfaction. I quickly learned that running a business wasn't just about having a great idea. It was about being organized, responsive, and adaptable. There were late nights and early mornings packing boxes, handling customer complaints, and figuring out logistics. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in work, but I refused to give up. By the end of my first year, my subscription box company was profitable. It wasn't a huge success by any means, but it was a start. I had learned how to market my brand, optimize my supply chain, and build customer loyalty. And that's when I realized the key to success wasn't just about having a great product. It was about building relationships with your customers. The following year, I expanded my offerings. I started adding new products to the boxes, partnered with influencers, and worked on growing the brand's presence on social media. I also began to get feedback from my customers, which allowed me to fine-tune the experience and continue improving. But just when things were starting to look promising, disaster struck. The supplier I had been working with for over a year suddenly went out of business. I was devastated. Without them, I didn't have the products to ship, and I was left scrambling to find a replacement. For several weeks, my business came to a screeching halt. It felt like I was back at square one. I spent days contacting potential suppliers and trying to negotiate deals. I didn't have the luxury of time. If I didn't resolve the issue quickly, I risked losing my customers for good. It was one of the hardest moments in my entrepreneurial journey, but it taught me an invaluable lesson. Never rely too heavily on one supplier or vendor. Diversification was key. I eventually found a new supplier, and after a few hiccups, my business started to stabilize again. But the experience changed the way I operated. I became more cautious, more thoughtful about my decisions, and more aware of the risks involved in running a business. By 2020, my subscription box company had grown significantly. We were expanding into new markets, and I had built a team to help with the day-to-day operations. But the most rewarding part was the feedback from our customers. They weren't just buying grooming products, they were joining a community. They trusted the brand, and they felt like they were part of something bigger than just a transaction. Now, I'm proud to say that my company has grown into a multi-million-dollar business. We've expanded beyond men's grooming products and into other areas of personal care. We've built a brand that's known for quality, personalization, and customer service. But none of this would have been possible without taking that first step. The journey wasn't easy, and it was filled with obstacles. There were times when I wanted to quit, but every failure taught me something valuable. Every setback pushed me to work harder and think smarter. Looking back, I can honestly say that the hardest part wasn't coming up with the idea. It was having the courage to follow through, even when the path wasn't clear. To anyone out there who's thinking about starting their own business, I'll say this: you don't need all the answers. You just need to take the first step and then keep taking the next one. Entrepreneurship is a marathon, not a sprint. You'll face challenges, make mistakes, and experience setbacks. But if you keep pushing forward and learning from your failures, you'll eventually get to where you want to be. The key is persistence, and above all, belief in yourself. I was 22 years old when I first launched my business. It wasn't glamorous, and honestly, it felt like I was walking blindfolded into the unknown. I had no real connections, no investors, and certainly no blueprint for success. But I had an idea, a passion, and an unwavering belief that I could make something of myself. This is the story of how I turned a small side hustle into a six-figure business in less than 2 years. It all started during my senior year of college. I was studying graphic design, and like most broke students, I had to find a way to make some extra cash. One day, a friend approached me asking if I could design a logo for a small local business he was starting. At that moment, I saw an opportunity to turn my skills into income, so I agreed. The logo turned out better than expected, and my friend was thrilled. He showed it to a few of his friends who owned small businesses, and soon enough, I was getting calls and emails from people asking if I could design logos for them too. Word of mouth was spreading fast, and I found myself with more clients than I could handle. At first, it was just a hobby, designing logos for a few bucks here and there. But something clicked. I realized that I could make a real business out of this. So, I set up a basic website, created a portfolio, and started reaching out to local businesses offering my services. It was slow at first. My website wasn't perfect, and I still had no idea how to price my work properly, but I kept pushing forward. I was hungry for success. My first big breakthrough came when a small tech startup reached out to me for a full branding package. They were launching a new product, and they needed everything: logos, website design, social media templates, and more. The deal was worth more than I had made in a month's worth of work. I felt nervous as hell, but I knew this was the opportunity one had been waiting for. I spent sleepless nights perfecting the design and communicating with the client, making sure everything was just right. When I finally delivered the project, the client was thrilled. They praised my work and said they had been considering hiring a big agency but were so happy they chose me instead. They referred me to other businesses in their network, and suddenly I was getting more work than I ever thought possible. The problem now was that I was still in college, and I was trying to balance my studies with growing a business. There were nights when I would stay up late finishing projects, barely getting enough sleep to function the next day. My friends were out partying, but I was hunched over my laptop, designing logos and learning how to run a business. There were plenty of nights I questioned myself. Was I doing the right thing? Would I fail? But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop now. I had built something that was growing, and it was only a matter of time before it became something real. As graduation day approached, I faced a difficult decision. I had the option to take a safe, well-paying job at a marketing firm, which was the responsible thing to do. But my business was picking up momentum, and I couldn't ignore the fact that I had more clients than I could handle. I was already making more money than I would have at the firm, and it seemed like a no-brainer to keep going. So, I took the leap. I decided to go all in and turn my side hustle into a full-time business. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that if I didn't try, I would regret it for the rest of my life. The first few months after graduation were tough. I was still learning how to run a business, and I made plenty of mistakes. I mismanaged my finances, I took on too many projects, and I underestimated how much time everything would take. There were times when I thought I was in over my head, but I kept pushing forward. I reminded myself that every entrepreneur faces challenges, and the ones who succeed are the ones who keep going. Around the 6-month mark, things started to click. I started to get referrals from my existing clients, and my portfolio grew stronger. I even started getting inquiries from outside my city, which was a big deal. Word of mouth was working wonders, and I was able to raise my rates. But just when things were starting to take off, I ran into a major roadblock. One of my biggest clients, a well-established company, unexpectedly pulled out of a major project. They had been my primary source of income for the last couple of months, and without them, I was left scrambling. I had just hired a part-time assistant, and I had overhead expenses like website hosting and software subscriptions that still needed to be paid. I won't lie, it was a scary moment. I spent the next few weeks stressing about how I would make ends meet. But I didn't give up. Instead of panicking, I used that time to focus on new strategies to attract clients. I revamped my website, increased my social media presence, and reached out to every contact I had, offering discounts for referrals. Within a month, I landed a contract with a national brand, and that project turned into a long-term partnership. That one client saved my business and gave me the stability I needed to continue growing. From there, I started to build a more reliable client base, and I learned how to scale my business properly. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that my business has grown into a full-fledged design agency. I now employ a small team of designers, marketers, and developers, and we serve clients across the country. We've worked with some big names, and the company has reached 6 figures in revenue. The journey hasn't been easy, but looking back, I can say with confidence that it was worth every sleepless night, every mistake, and every setback. The key to success, I've learned, is persistence. There were times when I wanted to quit, when the doubt was overwhelming, but I stuck with it because I believed in what I was building. I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, and I still have a lot to learn, but I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. Starting a business isn't easy, and there will always be challenges, but the reward is worth it. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: take the leap. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because it will never come. Start with what you have, and just keep going. It won't be easy, but if you stay committed, success will follow. So, I've been thinking a lot about how I got to where I am today, and I figured I'd share my story in the hopes it might resonate with someone, or at least be a bit of a cautionary tale. It's been a wild ride, but I'm incredibly proud of where I am now, even though it wasn't always a straight path. I started out just like most people, with big dreams and a lot of uncertainty. The idea of owning my own business was always something I had in the back of my mind, but I wasn't sure how to make it happen. I grew up in a middle-class family, and while we didn't struggle, we weren't rolling in cash either. My parents worked hard to provide for us, but they weren't the type to teach me about entrepreneurship or financial freedom. They believed in hard work, saving money, and playing it safe, which was fine for them. But for me, something about it didn't sit right. I was always looking for something more. After high school, I went to college, partly because it felt like the thing to do and partly because I didn't know what else to do with my life. I studied business, mainly because it seemed like the most logical route for someone who eventually wanted to start their own thing. But if I'm being honest, I didn't get much out of those classes. Most of what I learned felt disconnected from the real world, especially when it came to actually launching a business. No one told me how tough it would be, how many failures I would face, or how much grit I would need to push through the tough times. No one mentioned that you can spend years building something and still fail. So, after graduating with my degree, I found a job at a corporate marketing agency. It paid the bills, and I learned a lot, but I hated it. The grind was soul-crushing. I spent my days working on campaigns for products I didn't care about, sitting through endless meetings, and watching people get promoted for reasons that had nothing to do with actual performance. It was a miserable existence, and I realized that this wasn't what I wanted my life to look like. I didn't want to spend my entire career working for someone else, helping them build their empire while my own dreams stagnated. That's when I decided to make the leap. I had no idea what the hell I was doing, but I had an idea, and that was enough. I had been obsessed with fitness for years. It was my outlet, my way of coping with stress, and I'd always loved helping people improve their health. So, I decided I would start a fitness brand. I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew I wanted to do something that would help people live healthier, happier lives. The first challenge? Money. I didn't have much saved up. I had maybe $5,000 in the bank, and most of that was earmarked for rent and bills. But I was determined. I scraped together every penny I could, took out a small business loan, and started looking for suppliers, manufacturers, and a website developer. I remember the early days, late nights, eating ramen noodles, and watching tutorials on YouTube about how to set up a website. It was overwhelming, but there was something exhilarating about it. Every step I took felt like progress. I launched my website and started selling products online. The first few months were brutal. I had maybe 1 or 2 sales a week, and I felt like I was shouting into the void. But I didn't give up. I kept pushing, kept learning, and kept tweaking things. I read every book, listened to every podcast, and joined every Facebook group related to entrepreneurship. Slowly but surely, I started seeing some traction. But then came the next big challenge, marketing. I didn't have much of a budget for ads, so I relied heavily on social media. I started posting daily workout tips, motivational content, and behind-the-scenes looks at my life and business. Slowly but surely, I started gaining followers, and some of them actually bought my products. It was small, but it was a start. Then, I got lucky. A well-known fitness influencer happened to find my brand and posted about it on their Instagram. Suddenly, sales were coming in faster than I could handle. My small operation went from a one-person show to a team of 3 within months. I had to figure out logistics, customer service, and, most importantly, how to scale. Scaling was a nightmare. I had no idea what I was doing, and I made tons of mistakes. My inventory management was all over the place. I underestimated demand and ended up with huge backlogs of orders. I remember one night staying up until 3 a.m. just packing orders, feeling completely overwhelmed. There were days when I thought I was going to lose everything. But somehow, I kept going. I brought on more help, hired a few contractors, and slowly started getting the hang of it. It wasn't easy, And there were plenty of setbacks along the way. I had products that didn't sell as well as I thought they would. I had supply chain issues that delayed shipments. I had customer complaints about everything from packaging to delivery times. But every time something went wrong, I tried to learn from it. I made it a point to listen to my customers, fix what wasn't working, and keep improving. Slowly, the business started growing, and so did my confidence. Eventually, the business hit a tipping point. We were no longer just a small fitness brand. We were a legitimate company. I started bringing in 6 figures in revenue, hired full-time employees, and expanded our product line. But even with all that success, the challenges didn't stop. There's always something new to deal with. One of the hardest things I've had to learn is that success doesn't solve all your problems. In fact, it can create even more. Today, I'm proud of what I've built, but I won't lie. There were plenty of times when I wanted to quit. Entrepreneurship is tough, and it's not for everyone. It requires a level of persistence and resilience that's hard to describe unless you've been through it yourself. But for me, it's been worth every sleepless night, every failure, and every setback. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that the journey is just as important as the destination. Yes, the money and success are great, but the real reward is the person you become in the process. I don't think I would have made it if I didn't have the mental fortitude to keep going when everything seemed impossible. I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't taken that first leap of faith. So, for anyone out there thinking about starting their own business or pursuing a passion, my advice is this: just start. You'll never have everything figured out, and it's not going to be easy, but that's part of the fun. If you keep pushing, keep learning, and stay committed, the results will come. It might take longer than you think, but it will be worth it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There isn't one. At the end of the day, it's about taking risks, embracing the process, and building something you're truly proud of. It's been a crazy ride, and I wouldn't change a thing. I always thought I was going to be a corporate guy. You know, the kind of person who climbs the corporate ladder, gets the fancy office, and enjoys a steady paycheck for life. That was the dream my parents had for me, and honestly, it seemed like a pretty comfortable one. But life has a funny way of pushing you out of your comfort zone, and for me, that moment came when I was working at a software company in downtown Chicago. I had just graduated with a degree in computer science and landed a decent job at this tech startup. I was a junior developer, still learning the ropes, but everything was fine. I was doing what I was supposed to do, writing code, attending meetings, and going through the motions. There were days I felt like I was just another cog in the machine. But there was always this gnawing feeling inside me: what if there was more? What if there was something else I could be doing? It wasn't like I was miserable, but something about the whole corporate grind didn't sit well with me. The endless meetings that could have been emails. The never-ending cascade of tasks that didn't seem to add any real value to anyone. Every day felt like I was just passing time, waiting for the weekend, and repeating the cycle all over again. I started to wonder, what if I was meant for something else? This is when I met Alex, my first real entrepreneurial friend. Alex was the opposite of everyone I worked with. He was always hustling, always moving. He had his fingers in many pies, starting businesses, flipping products, running a small e-commerce operation, and always had that gleam in his eye like he was working on something big. I was intrigued by him because, despite not having a fancy office or a big team, he seemed more alive than anyone I knew in the corporate world. We struck up a friendship, and slowly, I started to see what I had been missing. One day, we were having coffee, and I jokingly said, "Man, you should teach me how to start a business. Maybe it's time I finally quit my job and join the startup world or something." Alex, with that infectious grin, leaned forward and said, "You're already doing it wrong." Confused, I raised an eyebrow, and he continued, "What you're thinking is you need to wait for the perfect moment. You're going to sit around, saving up money, and then one day, you'll have the confidence to start. But that's not how it works. You just need to start. Now." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I had spent years planning my exit from the corporate world, waiting for the right time, but Alex was telling me I was overthinking it. He told me the best way to start was to fail quickly, learn from it, and pivot. He wasn't wrong. I'd been stuck in analysis paralysis, trying to make the perfect decision when there was no such thing. I needed to act. So, the very next week, I went home after work and brainstormed ideas. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured if I was going to jump in, I might as well do it with something I was passionate about: technology and software. I had an idea for a mobile app that helped people track and manage their fitness goals in a more holistic way, not just counting steps or calories, but integrating mental health, sleep quality, and nutrition. The idea was simple but had potential. At least, that's what I told myself. The next morning, I quit my job. I had enough savings to live for 6 months without worrying too much, and I figured that was my runway to try and make this work. But here's the thing. I had zero experience building a business. I knew how to code, but I had no clue about marketing, sales, or how to get users to care about my app. I started learning. Every free moment was spent reading articles, watching YouTube tutorials, and listening to podcasts about entrepreneurship. I reached out to people who had done it before. They all told me the same thing. Don't be afraid to fail, learn fast, and adjust quickly. But they also warned me that I'd face challenges I couldn't anticipate. The first few months were brutal. I spent hours building the app, tweaking the code, trying to make sure everything worked perfectly. I didn't have much money, so I couldn't afford to outsource anything. Every logo, every piece of marketing material, and every line of code was all on me. My savings started to dwindle and the pressure mounted. I had to keep moving forward, even when things seemed uncertain. Then came the first big blow. The app was ready, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to change the world. But no one cared. I launched it, got a few downloads, but the feedback was lukewarm. People weren't using it, and the reviews were not great. I spent the next few weeks tweaking the app, fixing bugs, and trying to figure out what was missing. I asked for advice from anyone I could, but all I heard was, you need to be more aggressive with your marketing. So, I decided to learn about marketing. It wasn't something that came naturally to me. I was the tech guy, the coder, but I needed to be more than that now. I learned about social media ads, influencer marketing, and email campaigns. I spent hours testing different ad creatives and targeting strategies. Slowly, I started seeing some traction. More people were downloading the app. More people were reviewing it positively. But it wasn't enough. That's when I realized I had been too focused on building the perfect product. I needed to focus on getting users, and I needed to do it quickly. So, I pivoted. Instead of just focusing on fitness, I expanded the app to include habit tracking, goal setting, and motivation features. I marketed it as a comprehensive personal development tool. Within 6 months of launching, my app was beginning to gain real momentum. I started seeing revenue trickle in from paid users, and I couldn't believe it. I had gone from a corporate drone to a full-fledged entrepreneur. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of moments when I thought about quitting. But I didn't. I kept pushing. Fast forward a couple of years, and the app now has tens of thousands of users. I've expanded my team, bringing on talented people who are passionate about the mission. We're still small, but we're growing. The road hasn't been smooth, and there have been plenty of obstacles, but looking back, I'm proud of what I've built. And you know what? I'm not done yet. The hardest part was taking the leap. But once you start, you realize the journey is a lot more rewarding than the destination. Sure, it's scary. Sure, it's risky. But it's also incredibly fulfilling. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a job you hate, wondering if you should take the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is simple. Start. Don't wait for the perfect moment. You'll never find it. Just start, and you'll figure it out along the way. Failure is part of the process, but so is success. It's all about moving forward, learning, and adjusting. It's been one heck of a ride, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'll start by saying that entrepreneurship is not a straight line. It's more like a roller coaster. My journey began when I was just out of college, unsure of what I wanted to do, but certain of one thing. I didn't want to work a 9-to-5 job for someone else. I had been inspired by the success stories of tech giants like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. I wanted to create something that could impact the world, or at least make a dent in my small corner of it. So, like many budding entrepreneurs, I jumped straight into the deep end. The problem was, I didn't know how to swim. In fact, I was terrified of drowning. But I figured I could learn along the way, right? I started my first venture with a close friend from college. We had an idea for an app that would help small business owners track their expenses. We were both tech geeks and thought it would be an easy sell. The market for small business software was huge, and we figured our combined skills, me in marketing and him in coding, would be enough to get the product off the ground. We spent 6 months building the app. During that time, I learned the importance of validation. We were so excited about the idea that we never really stopped to ask potential customers if they even wanted what we were building. We thought we knew best. This led to a lot of wasted effort and frustration when we finally released the app. I remember the first day we launched. We sent out emails, posted on social media, and even got a few influencers to talk about it. We were convinced that it would be a hit. But when the sign-ups started rolling in, let's just say, they didn't exactly flood in. In fact, the numbers were laughable. We had around 20 users in the first month, and most of them never returned after trying it once. It was a punch to the gut. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly why it failed. We didn't spend enough time getting feedback from real users. We thought we knew what small business owners needed, but in reality, we were too wrapped up in our own vision to listen to them. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're obsessed with an idea, but in the end, it's the customer who decides whether your product is worth anything. After that, we were devastated. We sunk a lot of money into the app and barely broke even. The worst part was the emotional toll. It felt like we'd let down everyone around us, family, friends, even our own expectations. We had to close the business, and I remember feeling a mix of shame and defeat. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I didn't want to go back to working a regular job, so I started thinking about what I could do next. This time, I decided to approach it differently. Instead of jumping in with both feet and hoping I wouldn't sink, I would test my ideas first. I began to educate myself on the basics of entrepreneurship, things like market research, customer validation, lean startup principles, and the importance of a solid business plan. In the meantime, I needed money to keep going. I didn't have enough savings to fund another project, so I took up freelance work. The gigs ranged from social media management to writing blog posts for small businesses. I was learning a lot, but more importantly, I was meeting people who could help me on my next venture. I began to network actively, attending meetups and industry events where I could connect with other entrepreneurs and potential mentors. It was at one of these events that I met Sarah. Sarah was a seasoned entrepreneur who had successfully scaled several startups. We hit it off immediately, and over the next few months, we met regularly for coffee. I'd ask her about her experiences, and she'd share lessons learned from her own ventures. It was through these conversations that I began to shift my perspective. I realized that failure wasn't the end. It was just part of the process. What mattered was how you bounced back. Eventually, after working on various side projects, I came up with an idea for a subscription-based service for small business owners who needed marketing help. This time, I decided to go straight to the source. I interviewed dozens of small business owners, asking them about their pain points and what kind of marketing support they needed. I took careful notes, and the more I listened, the clearer it became. They needed an affordable, flexible solution that could be customized to their specific needs. Armed with this feedback, I began developing a new business model. Instead of offering a one-size-fits-all product, I decided to create a platform that allowed business owners to select the services they needed and pay only for those. No more wasted money on features they would never use. It felt right, and I was finally excited about it again. However, the road wasn't easy. Raising capital was a struggle. Investors didn't take me seriously at first because of my failed app, but I didn't let that stop me. I kept refining my pitch, focusing on the market need and how my platform was different from existing options. Slowly, I started to get some traction. A few angel investors came on board, and I was able to hire a small team to help develop the product further. The next year was a whirlwind of growth. We launched the platform, and within 6 months, we had over 1,000 customers. Word of mouth and targeted marketing helped spread the word, and we eventually made enough money to reinvest in the business and scale up. We added new features, improved the user interface, and expanded our team. By the second year, we were hitting profitability, and I was finally able to pay myself a salary that was on par with what I would have earned at a traditional job. But even then, things weren't perfect. There were always new challenges. We had issues with cash flow, hiring the right people, and maintaining customer satisfaction. We lost some key clients early on because we didn't meet their expectations, but we used those losses to learn and improve. One of the biggest lessons I learned was the importance of persistence. In the early days, I wanted to quit more times than I could count. But each time I felt like giving up, I remembered why I started. I wasn't doing this for the money. I was doing it because I wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted to create a business that helped people, and that kept me going. Today, my company is thriving. We have a team of 20 employees, a growing customer base, and we're expanding into new markets. I still face challenges, but they don't feel as overwhelming as they once did. I've learned that success doesn't come overnight, and it's not just about having a great idea. It's about execution, resilience, and a willingness to adapt. If I could go back and give myself one piece of advice during those early days, it would be this. Don't fear failure, but learn from it. It's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many times you get back up. Entrepreneurship is a journey. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of setbacks. But for me, it's been the most rewarding experience of my life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I remember the day I decided to start my business as if it happened yesterday. It was a cool evening in early spring, and I was sitting at my small kitchen table, looking at a stack of bills that seemed to be growing exponentially. I had a well-paying job in marketing at a mid-sized company, but the weight of working for someone else, not knowing if I would still have a job in a few months or if I would ever get the promotion I'd been hoping for, was starting to crush me. I had always been the type of person who needed more freedom, more flexibility, and above all, more control over my destiny. So that day, I made the decision to take the plunge. I didn't know what exactly I would do, but I knew that I couldn't keep living the way I was. My first steps were the hardest. I spent weeks researching different business ideas, looking for something that felt right. I toyed with starting an online store, offering handmade products, or even a food delivery service. But nothing felt like it had the spark I needed. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across an article about social media management and digital marketing. It was like a light bulb went off. I had been working in marketing for years and had built a solid network of connections in the industry. Why not use that experience to help other small businesses grow their online presence? I jumped in head first. I registered the business name, set up a website, and launched my social media profiles. I didn't have a fancy office, a huge budget, or a team behind me. I had a laptop, an internet connection, and a ton of determination. But I also had no clients, and no real idea of how to actually land those clients. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and terror. What if no one wanted to hire me? What if I spent all this time and money and it all failed? For the first few months, things were slow. I spent most of my time cold emailing businesses, offering them my services. I must have sent hundreds of emails. Most went unanswered. Some companies replied with a simple no thanks or we're happy with our current setup. It felt like a never-ending cycle of rejection. But I kept pushing forward. I knew that persistence was key, and I refused to give up. Then, one day, I got an email back. It was from a small local coffee shop. They wanted to know more about my services. I practically jumped out of my seat. I scheduled a meeting with them, went in with my proposal, and by the end of the meeting, they had signed on as my first client. I was over the moon. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was a start. I finally had proof that I could make this work. From there, things started to snowball. That first coffee shop client referred me to another small business owner, and that second client referred me to someone else. Slowly but surely, I started to build a reputation as someone who could deliver results. I focused on providing value, going above and beyond for each of my clients. I made sure to respond quickly to their needs, learn their businesses inside and out, and develop marketing strategies that truly resonated with their audiences. Word spread, and my client base grew. The next major hurdle came when I realized that I couldn't continue doing everything myself. At first, it was just me handling the marketing strategy, the social media management, the content creation, and everything else that came with running a business. But soon enough, the workload became overwhelming. I was staying up late, working on weekends, and I still felt like I was barely keeping up. I had to make a decision, continue to work solo and burn out, or build a team and scale up. I decided to build a team. I hired my first employee, a content creator who was incredibly talented and had a background in graphic design. I also brought on a social media manager to help with the day-to-day tasks of scheduling posts, engaging with followers, and running ads. It was a huge leap for me. The idea of managing people was terrifying. I had never been a boss before, and I had no idea how to create a company culture or handle employee conflicts. But I knew I needed help if I wanted my business to grow. Looking back, hiring my team was one of the best decisions I made. It allowed me to focus on what I was good at, developing marketing strategies and growing relationships with clients. The team took over the day-to-day operations, and I could finally breathe. Slowly, I built a strong, capable team of people who shared my vision and were passionate about what we were doing. Together, we transformed our small agency into a recognized name in our industry. Fast forward a few years, and the business is thriving. We have multiple clients, from local businesses to large corporations, and we've even started offering additional services, like web development and paid search management. But it hasn't been all smooth sailing. There have been challenges along the way, tough clients, tough financial months, and moments where I wondered if I had made the right decision. But every time I hit a roadblock, I reminded myself of why I started. I wanted freedom. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to build something that was mine. The most rewarding part of this journey has been seeing the impact we've had on our clients. Helping them grow their businesses and succeed in the digital space is what drives me every day. I've also learned a lot about myself, about my strengths, my weaknesses, and how to handle the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. I've learned that success isn't just about making money. It's about building relationships, being adaptable, and keeping a positive attitude in the face of adversity. If I could give advice to someone who's just starting out, it would be this. Don't be afraid to start small. Don't expect everything to happen overnight. And most importantly, don't give up when it gets tough. The road to success isn't linear, and you will face setbacks, but the key is persistence. Take things one step at a time, and before you know it, you'll be looking back on your journey, amazed at how far you've come. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, and it's certainly not easy. But if you have the drive, the determination, and the willingness to learn, it's one of the most rewarding paths you can take. I'm proof of that. And no matter how many challenges come my way, I know I'll keep moving forward because the only way to truly fail is to stop trying. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just turned 26. I'd spent the last few years bouncing from one dead-end job to another, each more frustrating than the last. I'd worked in retail, then at a tech startup where the founders seemed to think business casual meant not wearing pajama pants to meetings. I was tired of being stuck, working for people who had their own dreams but couldn't care less about mine. So, on a whim, I decided to quit my job and take a leap. I had no concrete plan, but I had one thing that I believed in, my ability to hustle. I'd always been a side gig person. Whether it was selling vintage sneakers online, designing logos for local businesses, or writing articles for small websites, I'd found ways to make extra money while juggling full-time work. My dream, though, was always to build something bigger, something that could be my own. My idea came one night as I was lying in bed, scrolling through Instagram. I had noticed a surge in influencers promoting products, and many of them were constantly pushing fitness supplements, clothes, or gadgets. But what caught my attention was the rise of microbrands, small companies that weren't trying to be the next Nike or Apple, but instead were offering niche, high-quality products to people who cared about the details. What if I could create a brand that wasn't just about selling a product but telling a story? A brand that catered to a very specific audience, but with a level of authenticity that made it stand out from the noise of all the generic stuff out there. The idea sparked like a match in a dark room, and suddenly, I had a vision. I was going to start a high-end, handmade leather goods company. I spent the next couple of weeks diving into everything I could learn about leatherworking, branding, e-commerce, and digital marketing. I didn't have much money to start with, so I turned to YouTube for tutorials and online communities for advice. I even bought a couple of cheap leathercraft kits to practice on, figuring that I could at least get a feel for the process before deciding to invest in better tools and materials. The more I learned, the more I realized that starting this business wouldn't be easy. Leatherworking was an art form, not just a craft. And creating a brand meant understanding everything from product design to photography, packaging, and customer service. The only way I was going to make this work was if I treated it like a real business from day one. No half-assing. By the end of the month, I had saved enough money to buy a few tools, some basic leather, a set of stamps, dyes, needles, and thread. I cleared out a corner in my small apartment, set up a makeshift workshop, and got to work. My first product was a simple wallet, but I poured everything I had into it. Every stitch was meticulously placed, and I made sure the edges were smooth and clean. It wasn't perfect, but it was my first real attempt, and I felt proud of it. I started sharing my progress on social media, documenting my journey from scratch. I wanted people to see the behind the scenes of what I was doing. It wasn't just about the finished product, it was about the process. I posted pictures of the leather cutouts, the stitching process, and the mistakes I made along the way. Slowly but surely, people started to take notice. At first, it was just a few friends and family who bought the wallets. Then, a couple of influencers I had connected with on Instagram started showing interest. I offered them free products in exchange for honest reviews. This led to more exposure, and as I began getting orders, I started improving my workflow. I moved out of my cramped apartment into a small studio space, invested in better tools, and refined my designs. But that's when things got really tough. There were moments where I felt completely overwhelmed. Cash flow was always a problem. I had to reinvest every dollar into new materials, marketing, and tools. And then there was the pressure of being the sole person responsible for everything: product development, customer service, shipping, finances. There were days when I worked 18 hours straight just to keep up with orders, and I wasn't sure if I could make it. I hit a point where I seriously considered quitting. I had to decide whether I was going to stick with it or go back to a regular job where I could get a paycheck every 2 weeks. But then something happened. The first significant order came through from a retailer. They wanted to carry my products in their store. This was the break I needed. With the order in hand, I knew I had to go all in. I borrowed some money from a close friend, who I still owe, to get a larger batch of leather and supplies. I worked day and night to fulfill the order and send everything off. When I received the payment a few weeks later, it felt like validation. My business was real. But that didn't mean everything was smooth sailing after that. I had to scale up, and scaling meant hiring help. I found a few local artisans who were willing to work with me. I still couldn't afford to pay them much, but I promised them a share of profits once we were in a position to grow. Slowly, I built a small team. We moved into a larger workshop, and I could focus more on managing the business while they helped with production. By 2019, I had built a steady stream of revenue. I was still working around the clock, but I had more freedom to experiment with new products and collaborations. My brand, which had started as a side hustle, was now a legitimate business with a loyal customer base. I'd also started to dabble in wholesale, and my products were being stocked in several boutiques around the country. The turning point came in 2020, though. The pandemic hit, and everything changed. Consumer behavior shifted, and e-commerce boomed. People who were stuck at home wanted to buy high-quality products that would last, and my brand's focus on craftsmanship resonated. We saw a huge spike in online sales, and for the first time in years, I was able to hire a full-time team to help with marketing, operations, and customer service. It's now 2025, and the business has grown far beyond what I ever imagined. We're not a massive company, but we've found a solid niche, and we've built a community of customers who believe in what we do. I still spend most of my time on product design and brand strategy, and I've made it a point to keep our values intact. We're focused on sustainability, craftsmanship, and quality, and we make sure every product we send out is something we're proud of. Looking back, there were so many moments where I could have given up, where the challenges seemed too great. But I learned that success isn't about having a perfect plan from the start. It's about adapting, working relentlessly, and being willing to make mistakes and learn from them. Today, I can say that I'm proud of what I've built, and I know I wouldn't be here if I hadn't taken that leap back in 2016, when I was just tired of being stuck. I started my business with a $300 loan and a dream, and now it's worth over $10 million. But the road to get here was anything but smooth. This is the story of how I built my business from the ground up, faced countless challenges, and learned valuable lessons along the way. It all started back in 2013. I was fresh out of college with a degree in marketing, but I had no real direction. My job search was a mess. I couldn't land a single interview, and even the ones I did get seemed like they were more about giving me a taste of rejection than offering an actual opportunity. I was frustrated, stuck in a dead-end part-time job, and unsure of what to do next. One night, after another failed attempt to apply for a job I was overqualified for, I was talking to my best friend, Ryan. He mentioned something that stuck with me. You know, if you don't like the jobs you're getting, why not just make your own? At first, I laughed it off, thinking it was just another one of those start your own business ideas that everyone throws around. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had always been passionate about fitness, and while I wasn't exactly an expert, I knew a lot about the industry and the people in it. I had a decent amount of knowledge about nutrition, exercise routines, and gym equipment, thanks to years of personal interest. The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. What if I started an online store that sold high-quality fitness products that I personally used and trusted? The concept sounded simple enough, but I had no idea what I was doing. The first thing I needed was a website. I couldn't afford to pay someone to build it for me, so I taught myself how to code. I spent weeks watching YouTube tutorials, reading blogs, and experimenting with website builders. It was hard, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I eventually got something up and running. With the website set up, I needed to find products to sell. I didn't have much money to work with, so I reached out to suppliers directly and negotiated deals. I eventually managed to secure a small batch of protein powders, resistance bands, and a few other basic fitness accessories. I figured I'd start small and see if there was any market for it before diving in further. I launched my website and waited, and waited, and waited some more. The first few weeks were agonizing. I didn't get a single sale. The website traffic was minimal, and I had no idea how to drive customers to my site. At the time, I thought the problem was my products or my website itself, but the truth was much simpler. No one knew who I was. My brand was invisible. I decided to invest a little bit of money into Facebook ads. I had a tiny budget, so I targeted a very specific audience, people interested in fitness, health, and wellness who lived in cities. I crafted a few ads and crossed my fingers. Slowly but surely, people started clicking on my ads, visiting my website, and even making purchases. My first sale was the most exhilarating moment of my life. It was like someone had just given me a ticket to the next level. But the journey was far from easy. The sales were small at first, and I was constantly juggling my day job, running the business, and figuring out how to scale it. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I did everything myself. Customer service, marketing, product sourcing, shipping, it was all on my shoulders. There were countless moments of doubt. I remember sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m., packing orders by hand, exhausted, wondering if this was ever going to work. I'd check my bank account and see a balance that barely covered the cost of the products, let alone my expenses. But somehow, I kept going. I didn't want to give up on the one thing I felt truly passionate about. Over time, the business started to grow. I invested everything I made back into the company, whether it was on ads, new inventory, or a better website. As I gained more customers, I realized that the key to success wasn't just having good products, it was about creating a brand people could trust. I started focusing on building relationships with my customers. I began sending out personalized thank you emails to every single person who made a purchase, asking for feedback and offering advice on fitness. I made sure to be transparent about where my products came from and what made them special. Word of mouth started to spread, and sales began to pick up. By 2015, the business was turning a profit, and I was able to quit my day job and focus on it full-time. It wasn't easy, but the sense of freedom I felt was worth all the sleepless nights. I hired my first employee, and we started working on expanding our product line. I invested heavily in SEO and email marketing, and the business began to snowball. But with success came new challenges. As the business grew, I had to deal with supply chain issues, managing customer expectations, and ensuring that the quality of my products remained consistent. I learned the hard way that running a business wasn't just about selling stuff. It was about creating an experience for your customers and constantly improving. In 2017, I decided to take the business a step further and launch a line of my own branded fitness supplements. It was a big risk, but I knew that it was the next logical step if I wanted to differentiate myself from the competition. The launch was a success, and it set the stage for the next phase of growth. By 2020, the business was doing millions in revenue, and I had a team of 20 employees. We had expanded our product line to include everything from workout gear to nutritional supplements, and our customer base had grown into the tens of thousands. I couldn't believe how far we'd come. But even with all this success, I've never forgotten where I came from. I still work just as hard as I did when I started, and I've learned to embrace failure and mistakes as opportunities to grow. There have been plenty of setbacks, products that didn't sell, advertising campaigns that flopped, and personal struggles that took their toll on me. But each one taught me a valuable lesson. Looking back, the thing I'm most proud of is that I created something from nothing. I built a brand, a community, and a business that impacts people's lives in a positive way. It wasn't easy, and I definitely didn't have it all figured out from the start, but through perseverance, a willingness to learn, and a passion for what I do, I turned a small idea into something bigger than I ever imagined. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone looking to start their own business, it's this. Don't expect things to be easy. There will be times when you want to quit. There will be times when you question if it's all worth it. But if you keep pushing forward, keep learning, and keep adapting, success will follow. It won't happen overnight, but if you have the grit to stick with it, you can achieve anything. A few years ago, I found myself sitting at my desk in a small, dimly lit office with a pile of rejection emails in front of me. I was about 25 years old and had been working for a tech company for 3 years. I had a decent job, decent pay, and decent benefits. But something was missing. The drive, the spark, that desire to create something from scratch. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I was getting bored. The thrill of working for a company that was growing rapidly had worn off. And yet, I had no idea what I wanted to do next. The idea for my business actually came from an unlikely place, a weekend camping trip. I had always been someone who loved the outdoors. Hiking, camping, fishing. I did it all. On this particular trip, I ran into a problem. The portable stove I had been using on my trips broke halfway through the weekend. It wasn't the first time I'd had issues with camping gear. Half of my outdoor gear seemed to fail in one way or another when I needed it most. As I sat by the campfire trying to figure out how to cook my food with a damaged stove, I thought, there's got to be a better way. By the time I got back to the city, I couldn't stop thinking about it. There were plenty of companies making outdoor gear, but they all seemed to focus on the same things: tents, backpacks, sleeping bags, etc. There was a gap in the market for durable, high-quality camping stoves and cooking gear that could actually stand up to the demands of serious outdoor enthusiasts. After all, when you're out in the wild, having reliable equipment could be the difference between a successful trip and a disaster. I spent the next few months obsessing over this idea. I started by researching the camping gear market. I scoured the web for reviews, looked at competitors, and read everything I could about stoves and cooking equipment. The more I learned, the more I realized that the camping stove market was lacking in innovation. Most stoves on the market were either cheap and unreliable or too bulky and heavy. There was a real opportunity to create a lightweight, efficient, and durable stove that would cater to serious outdoor adventurers. But there was one major obstacle. I didn't know the first thing about manufacturing outdoor equipment. I had no technical knowledge about engineering, no suppliers, and no idea how to even begin creating a product. I thought back to my job at the tech company. It had involved a lot of problem solving, and I had learned a lot about how to build products from scratch. I figured I could apply the same principles to this new venture. So, I quit my job and decided to dive headfirst into this new world. I started by reaching out to manufacturers, trying to find a factory that could bring my vision to life. It wasn't easy. Most manufacturers were hesitant to take on a first-time entrepreneur with no experience, and I got a lot of doors slammed in my face. I even had a few manufacturers laugh at me when I told them what I wanted to create. But I was determined. I kept pushing and finally found a small factory in China that was willing to work with me. At this point, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I would spend hours every day on the phone with suppliers and engineers, learning the basics of design, prototyping, and manufacturing. I worked on perfecting my stove design, keeping it lightweight, efficient, and durable. After countless revisions and late-night brainstorming sessions, I finally had a prototype. But the work didn't stop there. Now that I had a product, I needed to figure out how to market it. I had no business background, no marketing degree, and no brand to speak of. I was just a guy with a new product and a big dream. I started small, setting up a website, taking product photos with my phone, and creating social media accounts to promote my idea. I reached out to outdoor influencers, sending them free products in exchange for reviews. Slowly, but surely, my stove started gaining attention. At first, sales were slow. Very slow. I remember days where I'd go to my website and check the order sheet, only to find 1 or 2 stoves had been sold. I would celebrate those small victories, but there were many more days where I felt like I was wasting my time. But I refused to quit. I kept learning, tweaking my marketing strategy, and refining my product. Eventually, word started to spread. The product reviews were positive, and people started sharing their experiences on social media. The brand began to grow organically, and slowly but surely, I started to see the sales numbers creep upward. I expanded the product line to include different types of camping stoves and cooking gear, and the business began to take on a life of its own. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. The more successful the business became, the more challenges I encountered. Managing inventory was a nightmare. There were times when I would get a huge influx of orders, only to realize I didn't have enough stock to fulfill them. I had to scramble to get more products made, often at the last minute, which caused a lot of stress. Hiring the right team was another challenge. At first, it was just me, running the entire show. But as the business grew, I had to bring on employees to help with everything from customer service to logistics. One of the most difficult hurdles was scaling up the business. The factory in China I had been working with was struggling to keep up with demand, and I realized I needed to find new suppliers. I spent weeks searching for better manufacturing partners and exploring different logistics solutions. I even considered opening my own factory at one point, but the costs were astronomical, so I decided to focus on improving the relationships I had with my existing partners. As the business continued to grow, I learned to manage my time better and delegate more effectively. I brought on a marketing team, a customer service team, and eventually a product development team to help refine our offerings. The company that had once been a one-man operation was now a small, but growing, business with a global reach. We were selling to customers in North America, Europe, and even parts of Asia. Today, my company is thriving. We've expanded our product line to include a range of outdoor gear, from portable grills to survival kits, and we've made a name for ourselves in the outdoor community. What started as a simple idea during a camping trip has turned into a multi-million-dollar business. The road to success wasn't easy, and there were many times I wanted to give up. But looking back, I realized that every rejection, every setback, and every challenge was part of the journey that brought me to where I am today. If there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that perseverance, adaptability, and a willingness to learn are the keys to entrepreneurship. Starting a business isn't easy, but if you're passionate about your idea and willing to put in the work, anything is possible. I never thought I'd be in the position I am today. There's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot in business circles: fake it till you make it, and for the longest time, I lived by it. The story I'm about to tell isn't about a smooth journey to success. It's about taking risks, enduring failure, and figuring it out when everyone else thought you were crazy. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I'm definitely well on my way, and I have learned more about myself and business than I could have ever imagined. It all started with a passion for gaming. Growing up, I was always obsessed with video games. My friends and I would spend countless hours in front of a screen, battling it out in every type of game imaginable. But there was always this nagging thought in the back of my mind: why couldn't I create something like the games I loved? I didn't come from a tech background. I wasn't one of those kids who grew up coding in their garage. In fact, I didn't even know the first thing about programming when I first entertained the idea of starting a business. But something inside of me told me I could figure it out. In my early 20s, I dropped out of college. I wasn't failing academically, but I felt trapped. The idea of sitting through more lectures for years on end felt like a waste of time. I wanted to build something, and I was tired of waiting for the perfect moment. It wasn't long after that I started my first venture, a website that reviewed the latest games and provided tips for hardcore players. I spent months working on the site in my spare time, all while working a minimum wage job at a fast food chain. The first few months were tough. I barely made enough to pay for the hosting fees and domain renewal, let alone cover my basic expenses. But I didn't give up. I spent hours learning web design, SEO strategies, and marketing tactics. One of the hardest things about starting out was realizing that no one cared. Sure, I got a few likes and comments here and there, but it was clear that I was competing against the big players who had already established themselves in the market. I realized quickly that I needed to stand out, but I wasn't sure how. I started listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, and reading blogs about entrepreneurship. That's when I had an epiphany. I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. Instead, I just needed to find a niche within the gaming world. So, I focused on indie games, something I knew was underrepresented in the gaming community. Indie developers were struggling to get their games noticed, and I figured if I could give them a platform, I might have something unique. At first, it was tough. No one wanted to work with me. I was just some random kid with a small website and no real credibility. But then, one indie developer agreed to let me review their game. That review did better than I ever expected. It was the first real piece of content on my site that got significant traffic. Word spread, and slowly but surely, more indie developers began reaching out. I started to see real traction. But here's the thing: success didn't happen overnight. There were still long stretches of no money and no growth. I didn't have the resources to scale quickly, and the competition was fierce. In fact, I often found myself questioning whether I should just give up. But the more I learned about the gaming industry, the more I realized how important my platform could be. The small victories kept me going. The indie devs that reached out and told me how much my reviews meant to them. The readers who commented on my articles saying that I helped them discover their new favorite game. It was these small moments that pushed me forward when everything else seemed bleak. The breakthrough came when I was able to land a sponsorship deal with an indie game studio. I couldn't believe it when I first got the email. The studio wanted me to feature their game in an article and offer a giveaway to my readers. This was a huge moment for me. It wasn't just a step toward financial stability, it was validation that I was onto something. The sponsorship was a game changer. It gave me the funds to reinvest in my website, improve my content, and even hire a small team to help me out. Over the next few years, the business continued to grow, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still plenty of hiccups. One of the biggest struggles I faced was scaling my team. I had brought on a few freelancers, but managing a team was a completely different beast. I didn't know how to delegate, how to communicate effectively, or how to make tough decisions. I remember the first time I had to let someone go. It felt like a personal failure, even though I knew it was the right decision. But with every mistake, I learned. I learned how to build a stronger team, how to be a better leader, and how to avoid burnout. Eventually, the site became a go-to resource for indie game reviews, news, and interviews. I'd built a name for myself in a niche that was growing rapidly. But as things started to take off, I was hit with another challenge. A larger company, a giant in the gaming industry, contacted me with an offer to buy my website. It was tempting. The offer was substantial, and it would have allowed me to step away from the business and enjoy the fruits of my labor. But after weeks of deliberation, I turned them down. I realized that I wasn't done. The business wasn't just a job to me anymore. It was a mission. I wanted to keep growing, to keep helping indie developers, and to continue building something meaningful. In the years that followed, I made more mistakes, learned more lessons, and saw more wins. I expanded the business into other areas, creating a YouTube channel, launching a podcast, and even developing a mobile app for indie game discovery. Every step was a risk, and every step required me to learn something new. But here's the thing. I never stopped learning. Even now, I make mistakes and find myself in situations where I'm not sure what to do. But I've come to realize that the only way to truly fail is to give up. Today, I have a team of 15 full-time employees. The site makes a healthy income through sponsorships, ad revenue, and affiliate marketing. I'm not rolling in cash, but I've built something that I'm proud of, and I've created a business that helps indie game developers and gives value to the gaming community. The journey has been anything but easy. I've faced rejection, doubt, and failure at every turn, but it's also been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I look back at where I started and can hardly believe how far I've come. It's not a success story that happened overnight. It's a story of grit, determination, and finding purpose in something I loved. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's that success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about sticking with it, learning from your failures, and building something that matters. I've been an entrepreneur for over 15 years now, and my story is one that's full of ups, downs, and everything in between. What started as a hobby turned into a business, and then, through a series of fortunate and unfortunate events, became something far bigger than I ever anticipated. It all started back in 2008. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and had just landed a desk job at a small tech company in the city. I remember feeling like I had it made: salary, benefits, stability. But as the months went by, I began to realize something. I hated my job. The work was repetitive, my boss wasn't a great leader, and I was spending more time staring at a screen than actually doing anything that excited me. One day, I took a walk during my lunch break and found myself sitting at a coffee shop, staring at the people around me. I saw a guy on his laptop, sipping his espresso, and I thought to myself, what if I could be him? What if I could work for myself and have the freedom to do whatever I want? I didn't have any specific business idea at the time, but I knew that I wanted more. I started thinking about the skills I had, mostly basic web development and design, and how I could turn those into something bigger. I had built websites for friends and family before, but it was all small-time stuff. What if I could create a full-fledged agency? I was young, no family to support, no real responsibilities. I figured I could take the risk. After a few weeks of brainstorming and talking to a few old college friends who had some experience in business, I decided to give it a go. I left my job, saved up a bit of money, and started building my business, an online marketing agency focused on creating websites and helping small businesses improve their digital presence. I had no clients at first, obviously, but I had the drive, and I started reaching out to local businesses, offering my services for cheap. I would spend nights working on client projects, building up my portfolio, and refining my skills. The first few months were rough. I had no idea what I was doing when it came to sales or managing clients. I remember one of my first clients, an old friend's parents who owned a small bakery. They wanted a website, but they had no idea how to market it, and neither did I. I had no systems in place, no processes, no real understanding of how to scale. But I kept going, learning as I went. Slowly, things started to pick up. I made some progress with SEO, built a better portfolio, and started to develop more confidence. Word of mouth began to spread, and I landed a few more clients. I was still working out of my tiny apartment, working 12-plus-hour days, but I was finally making enough to survive. I remember the first time I made $1,000 from a single project. It felt like I had won the lottery. But the breakthrough didn't come until I attended a local business networking event a year into running my agency. I was nervous as hell, but I knew that I needed to network if I wanted to scale. That's where I met Mark. Mark was a seasoned entrepreneur who had built and sold multiple businesses in the past. We hit it off instantly, and he became a mentor to me. He taught me how to streamline my processes, how to better handle clients, and, most importantly, how to scale. With Mark's help, I started making some real changes. I raised my prices, began outsourcing some of the work, and created systems to make my agency more efficient. I hired a couple of employees, 2 designers and a project manager, and suddenly, I wasn't just an entrepreneur, I had a team. At that point, I thought I had made it. We were growing steadily, landing bigger clients, and I had the financial security I had always dreamed of. But then, in 2014, the unthinkable happened. The digital marketing industry and the way businesses ran websites started to change. Google rolled out a new algorithm update, and it completely decimated a lot of businesses' traffic, including ours. Overnight, a large portion of my clients saw their websites tank in the search results, and many of them stopped paying for my services. I was losing revenue fast, and I didn't know how to stop the bleeding. I felt like I was back at square one, and the pressure was overwhelming. I spent months trying to adapt. I dove deep into the latest marketing trends, hired consultants, and tried to pivot my business in every direction I could think of. But nothing seemed to work. It was during this time of struggle that I realized something. I had been so focused on growing my agency that I hadn't been paying attention to the bigger picture. I wasn't in control of the environment. Google, Facebook, and other platforms were. I took a step back and reevaluated everything. I thought long and hard about what I wanted from this business. Did I want to be a service provider forever, constantly at the mercy of search engines and social media algorithms? Or did I want to build something more sustainable, something I controlled? That's when I decided to pivot again. This time, I shifted my focus from being a service provider to creating digital products. I started working on software that could help small businesses with the same problems my clients had been facing, getting more leads, improving conversion rates, and growing their online presence. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of learning, a lot of failed attempts, and countless sleepless nights. But eventually, I created a software platform that helped businesses automate some of their digital marketing tasks. I launched it in 2016, and it was a game changer. The product resonated with businesses, and I quickly began gaining traction in the market. Over time, we grew our user base, refined the product, and began generating a steady stream of passive income. By 2018, the product had grown to the point where it was generating more revenue than the agency ever had. I sold the agency, took a few years to focus on scaling the software, and started exploring new ventures. I realized that entrepreneurship wasn't just about being your own boss. It was about creating something that could stand the test of time and adapt to an ever-changing market. Looking back, I can see how much I've learned over the years. There were times when I thought I was done for, when I was ready to quit, but those moments taught me the most. Entrepreneurship is a journey of constant reinvention, and you never really know where it's going to take you. But as long as you're willing to learn, adapt, and keep pushing forward, anything is possible. Today, I'm still running my software company, but now I have more time and freedom to focus on other passions, traveling, mentoring other entrepreneurs, and investing in new projects. I don't have it all figured out, but I've learned that the journey is just as important as the destination. It's all about taking risks, failing fast, and never giving up. If you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Just start. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but the key is to keep moving forward. Don't be afraid to pivot, don't be afraid to fail, And most importantly, don't be afraid to bet on yourself. I've always been the kind of person who believed in taking the scenic route to success. You know, the path less traveled, where the road is rugged and sometimes feels like a never-ending uphill battle. But looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Jake, and I grew up in a small town where opportunities seemed as rare as a good Wi-Fi signal. My family wasn't wealthy, but we made do. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom was a school teacher. I remember spending most of my teenage years helping my dad in the garage, trying to fix old cars. I wasn't particularly passionate about it, but it taught me the value of hard work and problem solving. In high school, I wasn't the most popular kid. I was introverted, focused on academics, and found solace in books rather than parties. But I always had a burning desire to build something. I wasn't sure what, but I knew that one day I wanted to run my own business. When I turned 18, I packed my bags and left for the city. I enrolled in a local university and decided to major in business. The first year was a huge culture shock. I was surrounded by students from all walks of life, some from wealthy families, others who had been born into privilege. But I didn't let that intimidate me. I was determined to make it. I worked part-time jobs to pay my way through school, from waitressing at a diner to doing late-night shifts at a local convenience store. Every dollar I earned was carefully saved, with my eyes set on something bigger. I always had this idea in the back of my mind, an idea that would take me years to fully understand, let alone execute. I wanted to create a brand that would disrupt the market, something unique that people would fall in love with. I didn't know what that something was, but I was sure it would come to me eventually. It was during my second year at university that I first started dabbling in e-commerce. I was walking through a local flea market one weekend when I stumbled upon a vendor selling custom-made phone cases. The designs were simple, but they caught my eye. I thought to myself, why not try this? Why not create something just like this and sell it online? I spent the next few months learning about online selling platforms, researching dropshipping, and setting up a website. The learning curve was steep, but I loved every minute of it. I didn't know it then, but that was the first small step toward building my business. The first few months were a roller coaster. I remember the excitement when I made my first sale. It was $12, and I nearly shouted in the middle of my apartment. But then came the reality check. My marketing was terrible, my product quality was inconsistent, and most importantly, I had no idea how to manage customer service. I got negative reviews, and some orders were delayed for weeks. The feedback was brutal. But rather than give up, I took it as an opportunity to improve. I spent the next year perfecting my craft. I learned everything I could about SEO, social media marketing, and customer engagement. I invested in better equipment for designing the products, and I hired a couple of freelance graphic designers to help me create more polished designs. Slowly but surely, my sales started to climb. It wasn't until my senior year that I really felt like I was starting to get a grasp on things. My side business, which had initially started as a hobby, was now generating some decent income. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was comfortable, and I could finally see a future where I could turn this into something bigger. I knew that I had something valuable in my hands. But there was one big obstacle I had to overcome: graduating and finding a real job. At that point, everyone around me was talking about job offers. My friends were getting interviews at consulting firms, tech companies, and law firms. They were so excited about what their future held, and while I was happy for them, I couldn't help but feel out of place. My business was still in its infancy, and it wasn't at a point where I could afford to pay myself a salary. But deep down, I knew that if I took a traditional job, I'd regret it. I wanted to build something on my own. So, after graduation, I took a leap of faith and decided to go full-time with my e-commerce business. The first few months after graduation were a blur. I had more time to focus on my business, but I was also living paycheck to paycheck, relying on my savings and a few freelance gigs here and there to make ends meet. I remember countless sleepless nights, staying up until 3 a.m. to fulfill orders, answer customer emails, and update my website. But with each challenge came a lesson, and with each lesson, I grew stronger. Slowly, my business started gaining momentum. I started experimenting with paid ads, influencer marketing, and partnerships with other brands. I also started offering customized products, which was a game changer. Then came the breakthrough I had been waiting for. I was contacted by a popular Instagram influencer who had a following of over 1 million people. They wanted to collaborate and feature my products on their page. At first, I thought it was a scam. But after a few emails and some negotiations, we agreed to a partnership. When the post went live, the response was overwhelming. Sales shot up, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly onto something. From there, things snowballed. I reinvested the profits into growing the business, hired my first employee, and scaled up my marketing efforts. It wasn't long before my brand started gaining recognition, and I had people reaching out to me asking for advice on how to start their own businesses. I realized that what started as a side hustle had turned into something much bigger. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. My business has grown into a full-fledged brand with a dedicated team, and I'm now able to do what I love every single day. It hasn't been easy, and there have been more than a few sleepless nights, but I've learned that success doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of hard work, countless mistakes, and an unshakable belief in yourself. So, to anyone reading this who feels stuck or like they're too far behind to start something of their own, let me tell you this: you're never too old, and it's never too late. If I can go from a small-town kid with no connections and no experience to running a successful business, so can you. Keep pushing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. And as for me, well, I'm just getting started. The road ahead is long, but I'm excited to see where it takes me. I always thought entrepreneurship was something that happened to people who were born with a certain kind of drive, those rare individuals who seem to always have a fire in them. People who were constantly thinking, constantly planning, constantly moving. I was never one of those people. I was the kind of guy who always wanted the 9 to 5, who found comfort in stability and predictability. That's until I realized that I was no longer able to stomach the monotony of working for someone else. I guess you could say entrepreneurship found me, whether I liked it or not. It all started in the winter of 2019. I was working as a mid-level project manager at a small IT firm. The job was good, the pay was decent, and I got along with my colleagues. But something was missing. Every day felt the same. The projects were repetitive, and I found myself growing increasingly resentful of the fact that I had to report to someone else, that I had no say in the direction the company was going. The thought of spending the next 20 years doing the same thing drained me. I started spending more and more time thinking about what I could do on my own. I had always had a knack for problem solving, and I was good with tech, but I had no idea where to start. One evening, I was scrolling through Reddit, as one does, and I stumbled upon a post about a guy who had started an online business in a niche that didn't seem like it would go anywhere. He made handmade wooden watches, and he sold them on Etsy. But the thing that stuck with me was how he described the freedom he had. The ability to set his own schedule, work from anywhere, and, most importantly, not answer to anyone. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. I thought to myself, why can't I do something like that? I'll be honest, at first, I had no idea what business I could start. I didn't have a unique product idea. I didn't have a deep passion for one specific thing. But I did know this: I had skills. I was tech-savvy, I knew how to manage projects, and I had a good sense of what people needed, even if I didn't quite know how to pinpoint it yet. That's when I decided to dive into e-commerce. My first mistake was thinking that starting an online store would be easy. I thought I could just throw up a website and start selling things. I spent a few weeks researching platforms, reading blog posts, and signing up for every newsletter I could find. I didn't want to invest too much money up front, so I started with a dropshipping model. I found a few suppliers who seemed to have good products, picked a niche, pet products, and set up a Shopify store. It seemed like a no-brainer. People love their pets, and they're always buying things for them, I thought. For the first few weeks, everything went according to plan. I spent hours setting up my website, tweaking the design, and writing product descriptions. I created social media accounts for my store, made some ads, and started running Facebook campaigns. Traffic started trickling in, but no sales. I wasn't discouraged. After all, I had read that it could take a while to see results, right? Then it hit me. The problem wasn't the lack of sales, it was the competition. There were a million other dropshipping stores selling pet products, and most of them had way more experience than I did. The advertising costs were eating away at my small budget, and the products I was selling weren't unique enough to stand out. I realized I was just another face in a crowd of millions, and I was struggling to figure out how to differentiate myself. I spent a few months in limbo, watching my store stagnate. It was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. I had dreams of building a thriving business, but every step forward felt like it came with 2 steps backward. I started questioning whether I was cut out for this. Maybe I wasn't an entrepreneur after all. Maybe I had misunderstood the whole thing. But instead of giving up, I decided to pivot. I dug deeper into research, and I began to realize that my original plan wasn't going to cut it. The issue wasn't just the competition, it was that I didn't know what I was selling well enough to market it effectively. I hadn't really thought about the problem I was solving for my customers. What was I offering that would make people say, "I need this"? In mid-2020, after a lot of trial and error, I decided to do something radical. I would focus on products that were not just popular, but that solved a very specific problem. Instead of pet accessories in general, I would focus on pet safety, a niche within the pet industry that wasn't as saturated. I spent a month researching pet safety trends, reading blogs, speaking to vets, and understanding what pet owners were truly concerned about. This was when I stumbled upon a new product idea, a smart collar that could track a pet's location and health metrics in real time. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was something that would appeal to pet owners who wanted peace of mind knowing their pets were safe and healthy. I found a supplier who could produce the collars at a decent price, and I put my own twist on the product by offering additional features like GPS tracking and health monitoring integration with a smartphone app. I launched the new product in late 2020, this time with a clear focus on how it would solve a problem for pet owners. I made sure the marketing reflected this, no more generic product descriptions or buzzwords. I created video content that showed pet owners how the smart collar could give them peace of mind, how it could track their pet's health, and how it could save them the stress of worrying if their pet had run off or was ill. The results were almost immediate. Within 2 months of launching, sales started to pick up. I began getting positive feedback from customers who appreciated the unique features of the product. I also scaled my advertising efforts, targeting pet owners with specific interests in pet safety and technology. By the end of 2021, I had built a profitable business that was making enough money for me to quit my job. I'll be honest, there were times when I wanted to give up. There were days when I thought I was just wasting my time, and nights when I doubted myself. But the thing I learned through all of this is that entrepreneurship is not about having a brilliant idea right away. It's about persistence, adaptation, and constantly improving based on feedback. It's about being willing to fail and try again, and again, and again, until you figure it out. Looking back, I can hardly believe where I am today. The company is thriving, and I'm not just financially better off, I'm happier. I've got the freedom to work from anywhere, and most importantly, I'm the one calling the shots. I still think about the Reddit post that got me started. It wasn't the specifics of his business that stuck with me, but the freedom he talked about. And now, that freedom is mine too. If there's one piece of advice I can give to anyone thinking about starting a business, it's this: don't give up too soon. The road is tough, and success doesn't come overnight. But if you keep at it, if you learn from your mistakes and pivot when necessary, you can build something incredible. I'm living proof of that. I started my journey as an entrepreneur when I was just 24, fresh out of college with a degree in marketing. I had big dreams of creating something impactful, but at that point, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I just knew that working for someone else wasn't my thing. My mind was constantly filled with ideas, some good, some terrible, but one thing I had in common with all entrepreneurs at the beginning was that burning desire to make something work. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were limited, but my parents were always supportive of my dreams. They told me that as long as I worked hard, anything was possible. So when I finally decided to leave home and move to a big city, it felt like I was taking the first step towards something bigger. I didn't have much money saved up, and I definitely didn't have any connections in the industry I wanted to break into. But I had one thing that I thought would make all the difference: ambition. I tried a few different ventures in my early years. The first business I started was a small marketing consultancy that I thought would be a perfect fit for me. I had the background, and I thought the skills I'd learned in college would be enough to get me clients. It was a disaster. I quickly realized that I had no clue how to actually run a business. I wasn't just struggling with the technical side of marketing. I was battling the fundamentals: how to manage cash flow, how to price my services, how to network with clients, and how to build a team. I went through 2 months of constant rejection, and the weight of it started to crush my confidence. I was still living on a shoestring budget and had to keep borrowing money from my parents, which was humiliating. After a while, I got to the point where I considered quitting and going back home to work at a stable job. The idea of settling into a 9-to-5 office life was tempting, but I knew I wasn't built for that. The fear of failure was real, but it was overshadowed by the thought of never pursuing my dream. I couldn't let it go. So, I decided to make one last effort. I pivoted. I had a conversation with a friend who was doing well with e-commerce, and I realized that maybe that's where I should focus my energy. The idea of building a brand from scratch, creating something people actually wanted, and seeing how it grew was exciting. So I set up a small online store selling custom-designed t-shirts. I had no design skills, but I'd always been good at finding trends, so I sourced designs from freelance artists on Fiverr and began marketing the shirts on social media. I spent a ton of time researching Facebook ads, Instagram marketing, and how to optimize listings on e-commerce platforms. It took a while for the ball to get rolling, but eventually my store started getting traffic, and I began making sales. In the first few months, I made a total of $50. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt excited. I was on the right path. I reinvested every dollar back into the business, refining my marketing strategy and experimenting with different products. I learned quickly that you can't just sell anything. You have to sell something people want, and you have to tell them why they need it. I found that niche markets were a goldmine, so I focused on small, passionate groups. I found success targeting people in certain hobbies, like pet owners, fitness enthusiasts, and gamers. The shirts I sold weren't just clothes. They were a form of self-expression for these groups. Things started picking up. In the second year of the business, my revenue hit $100,000. It wasn't exactly life-changing money, but it was a major milestone. I had learned so much in those 2 years: how to scale a business, how to handle customer service, how to build an online presence, and most importantly, how to create a brand that resonated with people. I had also learned a valuable lesson in perseverance. The setbacks, the rejections, the constant challenges, they were all part of the process. But the more I pushed through, the more I realized that failure isn't permanent, and success isn't guaranteed, it's earned. By the third year, my business hit its first $1 million in revenue. That was the moment that changed everything for me. It wasn't just the financial success that was rewarding, but the recognition that I had built something from the ground up. I hired a small team to help with the day-to-day operations. We expanded our product line beyond t-shirts, adding hoodies, mugs, and other merchandise. We also diversified into other niches, and my brand was starting to gain a reputation. I didn't have the resources to compete with the huge e-commerce companies, but I didn't need to. My focus was on building a brand that people trusted. The real turning point came when I was featured in a small e-commerce newsletter that had a decent following. The exposure catapulted my brand to a much larger audience. My sales skyrocketed, and I had to scramble to keep up with demand. That was a stressful time. I had to quickly find reliable suppliers, expand my team, and find new ways to scale the business without sacrificing quality. But I did it. The process was painful, but in hindsight, it was one of the best things that could have happened to me. As the years went by, my business continued to grow, but I also encountered new challenges. The market became more competitive, and customer expectations continued to rise. I had to adapt by continually innovating, improving my products, and ensuring that my brand stayed relevant. The pressure of being an entrepreneur started to weigh heavily on me at times. I had to make tough decisions, let go of employees who weren't the right fit, and navigate the constant uncertainty that comes with running a business. But through it all, I realized that being an entrepreneur is about resilience and adaptability. There will always be setbacks, and there will always be moments of doubt. But if you stay focused on your vision, continually learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward, you can build something lasting. Today, my business generates millions of dollars a year, and I've built a team of passionate individuals who help make it all possible. It hasn't been easy, and I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, but I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. I'm proud of what I've built, and more than that, I'm proud of how much I've grown as a person. Looking back, it feels surreal. It wasn't just the money or the success that made it worthwhile, but the lessons learned and the person I became through it all. Being an entrepreneur is a constant challenge, but it's the most rewarding challenge I could have ever taken on. If you're reading this and considering taking the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect moment. Start now, learn as you go, and keep pushing even when things get tough. Success doesn't happen overnight, but with persistence, you'll find your way. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.